Good morning. How are you guys doing this morning? Great, glad to hear it. If we haven't met, my name is Luke Hughes, and I'm the adult discipleship pastor here at Midway. We are glad you are here. We are in a series entitled The Gravity of Greed. Okay, the gravity of greed. And so Pastor Chad came a few weeks ago, one of our teaching pastors, and talked about the story of Ahab. And so how greed basically affected his entire family to the point where they were actually destroyed through the process of his selfishness. And then Pastor Witt came last week and unpacked three different stories and three different perspectives from Jesus about what we should actually be greedy for. So there are some things in life that we actually should be greedy for, that those things are the bread of life, that those things are these different things that Jesus suggests we should be greedy for instead of what the world says is important. And so what we've seen through this process so far is some things come to the surface. These principles that make themselves known. And one of these principles, I think, is kind of validated inside of each and every one of us. And that principle is the idea that for most of us, I would say that there's a longing and a deep desire inside of us to give to the world in a way that matters. To actually be generous, to give from our life, to give from ourselves into the world, to invest in the world. But the moment that we start to think that we want to do that, there is this counterforce inside of us that says, but if you do that, you won't have enough. That if you do that, who's gonna look out for you? And if you give and invest, what happens when the day you need that money? What happens the day you need that time? What happens the day you need those resources? And you have foolishly given it all away. And so we find ourselves in this weird conundrum because we are stuck almost like a gravitational pull in this process of greed. But I think for many of us, if we had a way, if we had a strategy, if we had the capability, we desire to leave the constraints of greed behind and blast off into a new adventure and a new horizon. And what's interesting about this process is, I think for a lot of us, we don't realize how in trouble we actually are. You know, we don't realize how in trouble we actually are. One place that this happens to me a lot is when I have to build IKEA furniture. You know what I'm talking about? And really, I mean, the writing should be on the wall from the beginning. You know what I mean? You go to IKEA and you get this shoebox and it's gonna be a piece of furniture is what they tell you. You know what I mean? You're like, I don't know how this becomes an armoire, but you know, okay. And you know what, about 60,000 steps later, you know, you're getting towards the end and you finally turn it over. You know what I mean? You're like, oh yeah, oh no. You've reversed one piece. You know what I mean? And so where it should be a finished side, you're looking at particle board on the front of your armoire, and you're like, this just ain't gonna fly with the wife. And so then you're going 87 steps back, you know what I mean? And you have you're sweating and you're shoving a screwdriver into like a little tiny hole in some pre-drilled piece of plywood, and you're just thinking to yourself, man, I remember reading in the instruction manual, it said, don't turn this lock clamp because it'll never turn back, but now it's gotta turn back, you know what I mean? Like you're just sitting there in that moment because you don't realize how much trouble you're in until it really happens. It happened to me again a few weeks ago. I have this diabetes monitor that I wear as part of my diabetes therapy, and it's basically got a battery that lasts about 6 months. Well, as luck would have it, I put it on my arm, and when you put it in your arm, this is actually really useful because you don't want it to come off, like if you're doing physical activity and stuff like that, but so it's designed to really only come off when the whole unit comes off at the end of 10 days. Well, it's the very first day, and I popped it in to where it's supposed to go, and so I put it in there, and the moment I did that, about an hour later, it comes up and says, battery dead. And I thought, man, I just put this sensor on my arm. It's like, they're kind of expensive. And so I was like, I don't want to waste the money. I was like, so now what am I going to do? I got this thing stuck to my arm, but the battery's dead. I got to get a new one of those. And so I think, well, maybe we can just finagle it out. Okay, and so that leads quickly to probably about 5 or so minutes later, my wife with a giant kitchen knife in the kitchen, wedging this thing in between my arm and the plastic, trying to turn it. And as I'm sitting there contemplating what I've done with my life, feeling the tip of pointy steel up against my skin. And it's getting to those moments where like hands are shaking and sweat is rolling and couples aren't really communicating. And you know what I mean? And it's that moment thinking like, well, this is how I die. You know what I mean? Like a bloodletting here in our kitchen. We go to the emergency room and they're like, what happened? She cut my arm off. He's trying to save $25. And you don't realize how much trouble you're in until it happens. And see, that's the thing I think we don't realize with generosity. That's the thing we don't realize about greed. See, we think this conversation about greed and generosity is kind of innocuous. We think that it really doesn't matter that, okay, I'll give a little money. You guys keep harping me about it, and I'll give a little money and it'll be okay. I'm a generous person, because I gave, and that will be the end of it. But what I want us to unpack together this morning is that it may be deeper than that. We may not realize how much trouble that we are in, and that the course and the DNA and the theme of our life may be more about self than we realize. And listen, that's all fine and dandy until the day it requires you to be selfless. Because then it may show how constricting the hold of greed is on your life. And so today I want us to look at some strategies from a book that you may or may not have ever studied through before. It's the little book of Haggai. So if you want to go ahead and start to turn over there, it's in the heart of the Old Testament. There's no shame in using the table of contents because it's only 2 chapters long. Haggai, the book of Haggai, and we're going to look at that together. But I think that this is a very interesting opportunity because one of the quakes and one of the things that is most prevalent, I think, that shows us that we're in more trouble than we realize is there's a word that resonates in this process. Because see, what's so interesting about generosity and the hold that greed has on our life is that if you're like me, there's one word that tends to resonate through the process of wanting things, of not getting things, of finding yourself inevitably worried about what is coming into your life, or is it enough, or am I secure? If you're struggling with this conversation, what you find time and time and time again is how badly and so quickly we covet and want other people's things. Am I right? Like many times, maybe this is just me, but you look around and you go, man, I really need a better job. You know what I mean? Like I'm so talented and I'm so gifted, like I should be doing more. Really, I should have his job or her job, or I at least should be being paid for their job because I basically do their job already and my job. You know what I mean? So I should be making more money here. Like I really deserve a raise. Like what is going on with these people that they don't realize my value and my worth to this company? And really we could get rid of that person and just put me in that job and everything would be fine. Or maybe your conversation goes more like this. Well, that person there, they have such an encouraging and a loving spouse. You know what I mean? And I'm stuck with old crazy pants over here. You know what I mean? Like, how is that fair? Like, obviously the reason they're successful is they get the support they need. They get the love and the cherishment that they need. And I'm stuck with Luke Hughes. Like, why did the fates roll the dice on that one? Like, what's going on? Like, really, I deserve a wife like that or a husband like that. I deserve to be happy. Why is my life so different than theirs? It doesn't seem to add up. I'm always getting the short end of the straw. Or you may look around and you may sound something like this. You may say, well, that person doesn't have to struggle. That person doesn't know what struggle is. If they had to go through what I had to go through, they would really understand, but they don't understand want. They don't understand manipulation. They don't understand loss. They look around and like, really, if I had their life, it would be like hunky-dory. Like everything would be great. But I understand what it's like to be painfully drugged through the ringer. I know what it's like to be lied to my face. I know what it's like to have someone pass away that you really, really need them in your life. I don't deserve to have another thing thrown on my plate because I am struggling here. And see, I think for many of us, we find these things cascading in on us, breaking in on us as we try and figure out what we want and what we need. And over again, it's about us, and us. And the word that comes to mind that defines these situations is just altogether disappointed. I think for a lot of us, we're just disappointed in life. We're disappointed in people. We're disappointed in circumstances. We're disappointed in our situation. It shouldn't have turned out like this. And so we look around and we find that we are disappointed, but why are we so disappointed? See, I think for many of us, we struggle with this, but we've never stepped back and really contemplated, okay, why do I bring to this perspective all this brokenness? Why do I bring to this perspective me as the center of it all? Because what's so funny is where you go, there you are. So for some of you, you could be actually in the happiest, most productive, most capable seasons of your life, but you're still just disappointed. And so I want us to open up Haggai this morning. And I want us to unpack and look at what may be the process that is breaking us, that there may be something in this generosity and greed conversation, that we may be more in trouble than we actually realize, but then begin to own and move towards what God desires and has purpose for us for in our life. As we open up the book of Haggai, you may not know anything about Haggai. You may have thought it was a pun, like, hey, guy. But in the book of Haggai, we begin, and it's right at the end of the Babylonian rule over the Israelites. The Persians have come in and cleaned house. They're the rulers and in charge now. And so the Persians have come in, and all the people that the Babylonians have captured, which includes the Israelites in Jerusalem. There's this big scene at the end of Jeremiah and several other books where Jerusalem is captured and they're taken off into captivity. It's been 70 years and the Persians have taken over the Babylonians' empire. And so they say, hey, to make friends, to let everybody know it's gonna be okay with us in charge, we're gonna let some of you guys go home. So, if you got deported by the evil Babylonians, we want to send you home. So if you want to go home, just come to us and you'll have our blessing. We'll send you off. And so several of the Jews come and they receive the blessing from the Persian crown, and they head off back to Jerusalem to rebuild Jerusalem. Some names that are noteworthy would be Zerubbabel, Joshua the high priest, Ezra eventually, Nehemiah eventually. And they all end up in Jerusalem there, and they're working together. And so this is the time period that Haggai finds himself in. Zerubbabel and Joshua have just come back with the first group of people. And so really it's refugees returning to their home. And even though some of them have made a living in that 70 years in Babylon, they don't really have a lot of economic power, and they don't really have a lot of extra to spare. They don't really have a lot of economic influence because they're coming back home, and really these places have been settled and people have come in and taken over what was a void. And so now they find themselves in some interesting economic situations. But into this space come the people of Israel. Haggai chapter 1, verse 2. This is what the Lord Almighty says. These people say, the time has not yet come to rebuild the Lord's house. Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your nice paneled houses while this house remains a ruin? So the first thing I want you to understand about the gravity of greed is this. The gravity of greed can warp our situation. The gravity of greed can warp our situation. Now, it makes sense at the beginning of this why the Israelites would come in and build their homes first, right? If you're returning to a city and a place that you have been gone from, it makes sense to reestablish your homesteads and have a place to do business. That's not what God's saying in this moment to the people. Like, he's not saying, hey, come in and be homeless and build my temple. No, what we see from the passage is God says, hey, listen, it's been brought up several times over the last few years that my house is sitting in ruins, and it just looks like y'all's houses are getting nicer and nicer and nicer. In fact, you guys aren't even living in domiciles or tents or dwellings anymore that resemble the time period. You're in nice paneled houses. You're building things up and things are beginning to look great. But hey, guys, nobody's focused on the thing that you said is most important. Nobody has come to rebuild the ruins that sit up on that hill that you say where the Holy of Holies used to dwell, where I came and I would meet with you as my people. It still sits in ruins up there. And see, the problem with the gravity of greed is it begins to warp our situation and we begin to desire that which is only for us. I mean, I know that's me. I hopefully many times you found yourself in the same situation, but you find yourself actively drawing all things back to whether it matters to you and your world. In fact, it's almost like greed is this black hole. You know, scientists say that the strongest gravitational force that we've identified through physics in the universe is the black hole, that it is the singularity of gravity where things are drawn in and then they never escape once they pass through the singularity. And so it's almost like we have this black hole of greed at the middle of who we are, and this black hole we try to feed and feed and feed, and all it does is it consumes and it consumes, and it's never enough. It's why you could come in and say, okay, well, I need to build my house before I build the Lord's house, and then 10 years down the road, nobody's built the Lord's house, but your house looks immaculate. Your house looks put together. Your house looks all in all better than it ever should before you did the thing that was most important. Why? Because greed warps our situation. It's this black hole that begins to draw in and shift and change the reality of what's truly going on. They spoke with their mouths, oh no, the Lord is the most important, but their actions betrayed that they desired most of all what was beneficial for them. And see, we understand this. In fact, many times, it's displayed in our culture. In fact, God makes it ever painfully clear right here in the passage. He says, now this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. You have planted much, but harvested little. You eat, but you never have enough. You drink, but you never have your fill. You put on clothes, but you are not warm. You earn wages, but you put them into a purse with holes in it. He says, listen, I see your perspective. You have made this thing all about you. And what you think is like the more food you put in, the more drink you put in, the more security you put in, the more warmth you put in, that somehow, some way, it's gonna begin to satiate the hungers that are driving you. But just pay attention, give thought to your ways. You do it and you do it and you do it, and nothing is changing. You're just breaking more. You're just hungry more. You're just more disappointed. Give thought to your ways. One of the ugliest things you'll ever see is when an estate planning turns nasty. You know what I mean? Because in that moment when someone has passed away, you're supposed to be remembering that person. You're supposed to be honoring that person's wishes. And it's just crazy how people can become so selfish, so me-centric, in moments where you're dealing with wills. And I was talking to someone recently, probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they were telling me about how the person that they had lost was laying out their wishes and how they had done it. And they had some distinct opinions about where certain finances were supposed to go. And so that had made several members of the family very angry. He said, listen, I'm just trying to help. He said, I thought, well, I got so much that what I'd do is I'd take a little bit of it and I would give a significant chunk of that to the person that was angry and try and even it up. He said, but you know what that did? It just made him more angry. I said, dude, I'm sorry. I said, but can I tell you something? The hard truth of it is this. If you gave every dollar of the inheritance to that person, they would still be angry. They would still be angry. Because see, that's the perspective of the black hole. That's the perspective of selfishness. It doesn't get better when you shove more and more of the resources into it that you think are supposed to help. In fact, it just grows it. And science shows us that too, that a black hole, as it consumes matter, it actually just grows in size. And so the hatred, the bitterness, the anger, the disappointment, all of those things, when we make it about ourselves, just continue to grow and fester and break and destroy. But it doesn't have to be an estate sale. For me, it just happens in traffic. You know what I'm talking about? You're driving along and you're like, hey, this is my 10 feet. Where do you get off over here on the Carrollton bypass thinking you could pull over in front of me? And until I forget which lane I'm in, you know what I'm talking about? And then I need to make that left that everybody's making. I'm like, Charity? How can you all be so cold-hearted? Let me in. I forgot. Okay, I got a kid in the car with me. He's yelling about, Thomas the Train. Let me in. Why? Because it's about us. It's me-centric. It's a black hole that keeps, and it will reverse the rules and we'll manipulate the system as long as we stay in the center. And God says, I see what you're doing. And you work and nothing happens. And you take in and take in and take in and nothing happens. And it's just gonna get worse because you have made yourself the center of the selfishness and the greed of your life. So the gravity of greed can warp our situation. The gravity of greed can also warp our mission. Verse 7, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. Again, he says, give careful thought to your ways. Go up into the mountains and bring down timber and build my house so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored, says the Lord. You expected much, but see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home, I blew away. Why, declares the Lord Almighty? Because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with your own. See, God in this moment says, listen, I see what you're doing. And you're making it sound all big and beautiful, like, oh, you're just taking care of what needs to be taken care of. But listen, the gravity of greed will warp the mission. And see, we've all heard this before, right? Is the glass half full or half empty? But the truth is, in this illustration, in this example, that if we see the glass as half empty, what we see is a world and a place that will not give us what we deserve. But those of us that have the blessing of seeing it as half full, what we realize is the world owes us nothing except for a place and a space in which we can invest. But see, the great problem of the gravity of greed is it will warp the mission. It will change your perspective. And all of a sudden, you'll be walking around saying, no, it's all about what I can get. And the problem is God cannot validate that truth in your life because it is an untruth. See, for many of us in the room, we've started to worry about the things that only God is supposed to worry about. See, whether the enemy comes or the enemy stays away, that's a God question. Whether the rain falls or the rain remains stored up, that's a God question. The circumstances and the processes of our life, it's a newsflash to many of us, but you're not in total control. You're not the master of your universe. And though you spin your wheels time and time and time again and frustrate yourself and make yourself more tired and more angry and less comes back, God will not validate you as the creator of all because you're not. Because you're not. So God says to the people of Israel, you say the most important thing is a relationship and a place and a space with me. So go up in the mountains, get the timber, and build the house. Because I'm not gonna bless you when you act like the lords and the creators of all. Because that's my position. See, God comes and he says to the people of Israel, listen, as long as you are consumed by the things that I am supposed to deal with, right? Because I own the cattle on 1,000 hills. I am the resourcer and the equipper of all. And so I decide how full this cup is. And so until you let go and let me take care of your situation, until you step out of the center of the black hole of your life, I cannot rain blessing on you, because all it would do is validate to you that this is all about you. And that would be the worst thing that I could ever do to your life. That would be the smallest mission that you could ever accomplish in your life. That would be the smallest use of the gifts and the capabilities and the calling that I've put on your life. And I am a good God, not a selfish God, so I won't do it, even though I love you. It's because I love you. I won't do it. But there's timber in the mountains. So go get the timber, bring it down, and build my house. Because you say it's the most important thing, so make it the most important thing. And what you will find is that God gives very concrete, very real opportunity for each of us to begin to maneuver our lives in a systematically generous way, to begin to counteract and reverse the flow of the gravitational pull of the black hole in our lives. Now, the next point is this, that the gravity of greed is reversed, that it is taken care of, that it is swallowed up in the systematic generosity that we produce in our lives. And now, I'm not gonna lie to you. You know, I kind of fancy being a free thinker and a poet. I was like, systematic, that sounds like such a boring word. You know what I mean? I was like, but no, it really is a decision that we make to be generous in the small, everyday decisions of our life that actually pan out to be who we truly are. See, it required a decision for me to be generous and then living out obediently that decision, regardless of what came, to see a real change. And so I did not want to deny us and rob us of the reality of this situation. And in fact, I brought a little something up here with me, because when I first made this decision, I was dealing with this. Many of you know what this is. I've seen one or two before. And when I first got married to Jessica, we had to make some decisions in our marriage. We had to decide, and we took on ourselves the biblical mandate to tithe. We said, okay, we're gonna give the biblical idea, and the biblical principle is this idea of giving a 10% of God's gifting, of God's salarying, of God's growth and generative process in your life back to him. So 10% of what we make every year, we give back to God. And the reason we do that is because God commands us to be generous. See, the idea of the tithe is this, that we give 10% of God first and foremost. It's the benchmark by which we measure generosity in our lives. Why? Because that 10% represents the 10% that we aren't in charge of. Whether the rain falls, that's 10%, that's on God. Whether the enemy comes to destroy, that's 10%, it's on God. See, it reminds us day in and day out, month in and month out, year in and year out, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of whatever season we find ourselves in, that this thing, it ain't on us, it's on God. It's on God. So we give 10% of our tithe to God. Now, can I tell you what happened when that happened? When we started to tithe, when we really made that decision to give 10% to God, God threw the floodgates open and down came a $900 MRI bill. I was like, what? And I was like, okay, Jessica, let's discuss this 10%. I was like, because God would probably want us to get out of debt, so that we could give more to him. Because the faster we get out of the debt, we could give it back to him. And luckily, God gave me a wise wife too, just like Pastor Witt talked about last week. He said, no, we made this commitment, we're gonna honor it. And truth be told, I desired in my heart to honor it too. And so we set up a payment plan with the hospital, and I was like, great, payment plan, whatever, debt. And we committed to giving what was God's, and this is the way we could pay off the debt, but also continue to serve in this way. And when we made that decision, when we had set up that payment plan, there was someone in our church at the time that came up to me and he said, hey, Luke, I heard about that bill. He said, listen, I'm gonna pay for it. He said, I'm gonna pay for it. I said, no, you're not. I was like, there's no way you're gonna pay for that. He said, no, I am, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. And he was bigger than me, so I let him do it. But in that moment, it was a test of faith for me and Jessica's choice. Whether or not the $900 got paid for in that moment of generosity by another person, or whether we had paid it off on our own, the point was the choice to be honoring to God, that this is his decision and his money. Because see, Jesus says something interesting about the tithe, right? Because for ages and ages, basically people paraphrasing have said this, right? They said, do we have to give the tithe? And this is basically Jesus' response. Jesus' response was, listen, you are free. You are free from the tithe. You do not have to give a tithe. You are free. You are free to give 100% of what's God's to God. Because God owns all of it. So we find that the tithe honors what is already true, that it all relies on God. Now, the second 10% that we give right off the top, I thought I'd mention this quickly, was we save. We take another 10%, we save. Now, statisticians, all those accountants, the people that are actually good at math, they tell you may need to save a little bit more than 10%, but right now I'm at 10%, so let me grow. And so we save 10%. Why? Because I think a lot of times Christians feel the pressure. We're like, well, should we really be saving? Because, there's so many hurting people in the world. And let me just tell you something. It's all right to save. It's all right to create a nest egg that provides for your family. It creates a moment of share. And I'll just give you some mental hurdles to think about as to whether you're doing it in a God-honoring way or if you're doing it in a self-serving way. Do you obsess about it? Is it your only recourse? Do you find yourself checking it time and time again? Or are you allowing it to be a faithful thing that is a foundation and a help in your life? See, I'm not gonna lie to you. I plan on dying in the saddle. But it'll be good for my wife and my kid to have some money to help go to college and to pay off the house and to be able to do ministry freely. Because the ultimate thing I would tell you is this: if you're self-serving or God-serving, is what are you gonna do with the money? Serve yourself or serve God? If you're doing it to go buy a boat and sail around the world and, just take care of yourself, you may want to think about what you're doing it. But if you're doing it because you want to make it easier on yourself when you're older and you can't work to tell people about Jesus and to continue to reach out into people's lives and be an investment and to be bigger and have more influence for the kingdom of God, then by golly, save the 10%, 15%, 20%. If you got stock options, I'll take them. Because I want to live big and generously for God. And then you have another 80%. And see, in our marriage and in our life, this is what we budget from. It's that 80% that we say, can we afford this phone? Can we afford this house? Can we afford to go on this vacation? And can we afford to eat out? It's that 80%, not the 100%, because 20% is already spoken for and off the table. But from that 80%, can we love, live, and give generously and represent God well? And see, listen, this is what it's all about in going to get the timber to come and build the house. So you might say, what in the world does $1 have to do with going to build the house of the Lord? Because listen, in the New Testament, it says this, that you are the house of the Lord. That you are the house of the Lord. And see, just as God said, no, listen, you need to make the most important thing, and we're gonna build the house of the Lord. You're headed into the mountains, there's gonna be trees up there. It's not some magical solution. The trees aren't dancing down here to you. You're going up there, you're gonna cut them down, and you're gonna bring them down, and you're gonna build the house. What's most important in your life? It's time to give some structure and some concrete strategy to how you are going to be generous with your days, with your dollars, with your decisions. Because you are the house of the Lord. See, I love it because this is very clear and very concrete from the prophet Haggai. Go get the trees, build the house. And Paul is just as concrete in the New Testament. Paul says this in Ephesians 4:28. Anyone who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with their own hands, that they may have something to share with those in need. You might say, well, I don't steal anything. Listen, Paul, I've never gone behind a cash register and taken money and run out of the store like a crazy person. I don't steal anything. We steal people's time. We steal people's spouses. We steal people's energy and we steal people's affection. We take it and we try and shove it into ourselves more and more and more, thinking that in some way it will fix the brokenness inside the selfishness of us. And we steal and we steal and we steal. Paul says it's very concrete. Those that stole, steal no longer. Work with your hands. Make the world a better place. Why? So that you may have something to give. You don't want to be disappointed? Give. Work and give. But what about me? You're sick of you. Work and give, work and give, work and give. And can I tell you something? In that, you will truly find yourself. You will truly find yourself. See, it's interesting because we get so worked up, right, about the half full and the half empty thing. We come and we say, okay, am I half full, half empty? Like, can we fill it back up? But can I just tell you something? If you're giving, if you're serving, if you're doing something good for the world with your hands in order that you might share, you never feel more than half full. Let me just, confessions of a pastor time, okay? You never feel more than half full. I'm not like, man, I am just bubbling on the inside today, just dealing with all of the issues that people got to deal with. You're never more than half full. But when you serve generously, when you give generously, when you engage in the decision to say, no, I'm gonna be systematically generous. I'm gonna stretch myself. I'm gonna grow myself. I'm gonna let God be God in my life and do the important things. I'm gonna trust you no matter what you say. Lead me, Lord. Then it's crazy how even when you're half full, your capacity grows. And all of a sudden, you have more to give. You have more to pour out. You have more, and even though you're still only half full, let's face it, there are some good days and there are some bad days, and you aren't perfect and you're not all bubbly all the time. Man, it's amazing how much more God can do through you in the world. Because it's amazing what happens when God enlarges our capacity even when we're only half full. See, this is the call of being generous. This is the call of working with your hands and stealing no longer, to be a servant that can share. It's when you make the most important thing the main thing in your life. And you begin to reverse the flow of that greedy destruction and give and give and give until you find yourself looking more like Jesus. Because, can I tell you something? There's nothing more nerve-wracking than a toddler with a toy. It really isn't. I'm not gonna, have you ever been in that situation, like your parents, toddlers, you're with me, you got a toddler that doesn't have a toy, and then you got a toddler that does have a toy, and then they meet each other. You know what I'm talking about? It's like a scientific reaction. You know what I mean? Like, something is going to happen, right? Because the moment that other toddler reaches for that toy, the first toddler is going to trigger everything inside of it where it goes, mine! And rips it back. And all of a sudden you have a fight on your hands, or some baby brawl. And you're just like, wow, I'm just such a great dad. And can I tell you something? The only person that deserves to be the center of attention and the center of the universe, though we try, though we've made ourselves the center of this black hole, though we've put and tried to be the master and commander of our own fate, we have tried time and time again to be the center of the universe. Only one person deserves that place, and it's God. But God came to us. And when he saw us trying to be where we did not deserve, God did not selfishly reach out and go, mine, you silly little human, be gone. This is mine, my glory, my place, me, center of the universe, me. Philippians chapter 2 says it like this. Jesus, being in every way in shape God, did not consider equality with God something to be selfishly grasped, but instead became the container, made himself a servant, and being in the very nature God, made himself nothing and obedient to death, even death on a cross. Saying, listen, I can take your brokenness, I can take your wantonness, I can take everything that you find that's making you empty, everything that you find that is making you insecure. I can take all of those things. I'm a large enough container. My love is sufficient. My compassion is present. And I can take those things in your life and change who you are from the inside out, but you gotta trust me. You gotta give me my rightful place. You've gotta give up all that you claim to your life. Lay your life down, because I have the power to take it up again. See, in the moment when Jesus could have yelled, "Mine," he emptied himself totally, submitting to the Father in all the great capacities of God to make way for us so that we could be forgiven, so that God could fill him up. And in Jesus, there's more than enough for everyone. Are you disappointed this morning? Do you find that you are never enough? Do you find that everything you try to put into your life is never enough? He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the author of all creation, he that holds the galaxies in sway. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, knows the details and the intricacies of how you are made up. And he says to you and to me, "Come, you who are broken. Come, you who are hurting. And in me you will find fulfillment and rest." So this morning, we choose to be generous because Jesus has been generous to us. We choose to lay our lives down because Christ has laid his life down for us. We choose to be stretched, broken, poured out, and refilled again because Christ has done it for us. This morning, would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me? Jesus, thank you for loving us. Thank you for giving your all for us. God, stretch our capacity because it's not about what's in the container, it's the capacity of what is able to hold. Because you are the one that has all resource. You can fill us up and pour us out again. So make us look more like you every day. May we be more generous like you every day. Let us make that choice to lean in every single small decision of the day, to let you be the center, to let you change our lives. I pray that there are people in this room right now, Jesus, that for the first time, they realize they've got to give up their selfish hold on their life and let you be the center of their universe, that you need to lead them. You need to make the decisions. They need to trust you in your love and your forgiveness. And that when they do that, their lives would be completely different. That you would show them a new way, that the land of disappointment would be left behind, and behold, a new life begins. It's in your name I pray. Amen. As we close today, I want to leave you with this one last passage from the book of Haggai. So the people wisely obey and they make the decision to lay the foundations of the temple. They make the main thing, the most important thing they bring back to centrality. And this is God's word to them through Haggai. Now give careful thought from this day on. Consider how things were before one stone was laid on another in the Lord's temple. When anyone came with a heap of 20 measures, there were only 10. And when anyone else went to the vine and went to the vat to draw 50 measures, there was only 20. I struck all the work of your hands with blight, mildew, and hail, yet you did not return to me. From this day on, the 24th day of the 9th month, I want you to give careful thought to this day. When the foundations of the Lord's temple were laid, give careful thought. Is there any seed left yet in the barn? Until now, the vine and the fig tree, the pomegranate tree and the olive tree, they have not borne you any fruit. But from this day, the 24th day of the 9th month, the day you made the main thing, the main thing. Remember this day, because from this day on, I will bless you. I will bless you. See, when you give yourself over from the power of greed into the life of generosity that comes from having Jesus, the creator and savior, in the center of your life and universe, then you have freed your capacity that God could be a blessing to the nations through you. So remember this day. For when you make the decision to follow Jesus, he will bless you.